On July 27th, 2024, in the town of Majd al-Shams in the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights, a rocket believed to have been fired by Hezbollah struck a football pitch on which children had been playing. 12 people were killed, all of whom were children, and an additional 42 people were injured. The strike was part of the larger Israel-Hezbollah conflict, which had begun after Hezbollah began launching strikes on settlements in northern Israel on the 8th of October 2023, the day after Hamas's incursion into Israel. 3 days after the attack, Israel assassinated senior Hezbollah figure and key advisor to leader Hassan Nasrallah, Fuad Shukr, in a strike in Beirut, citing the deaths of the children as justification. Over the following months, Israel conducted countless targeted strikes on Hezbollah targets throughout Lebanon, and on the 1st of October 2024, launched an invasion of Lebanon. The thing that sticks out about the Majd al-Shams attack is that all of the victims were members of the Druze religious minority, having taken place in a Druze majority town in the Golan Heights. The Druze are a highly insular and secretive religious group who are indigenous to the Levant, with there being substantial Druze communities in Syria, Israel, and Lebanon. They are one of the legally recognized minority groups in Israel, alongside simply Arabs who are overwhelmingly Palestinian, Circassians, and Armenians. In the wake of clashes in the Syrian city of Suwaida in July 2025 and the aforementioned attack in the Golan Heights in July 2024, Israel has used these actions against the Druze as justification for its own actions, notably the July 2025 airstrikes on Damascus, which targeted the headquarters of the Syrian military and the general vicinity of the presidential palace. The question remains though, why does Israel hold such a high degree of respect for the Druze as opposed to other groups, and why are they willing to carry out strikes virtually on their behalf, and what does this do for Israel on the world stage? As mentioned in the introduction, the Druze are a religious group native to the Levant region, with prominent populations in Israel, Lebanon, and Syria. They are a highly insular group who keep all of their religious practices secret and do not accept newcomers or converts, going as far as to completely discourage marriage with non-believers. Despite initially evolving from the Ismaili branch of Shia Islam, they do not consider themselves Muslim, and in a similar fashion to the Alawites, a similar sect also native to the Levant, consider themselves to be a completely separate faith altogether. As mentioned, the Druze are highly secretive, and within the faith a group of people referred to as the Ukal, or knowledgeable, hold the secrets of the faith and are responsible for retaining them, and educate the Juhal, or ignorant, in the moral and ethical codes of the faith. The Druze are particularly concentrated in Syria, Lebanon, and Israel, with there having been as many as 700,000 Druze in Syria prior to the civil war, making up 3% of the country's population. The largest Druze diaspora groups outside of the Levant are located in Venezuela and the United States. Historically and in recent years, they have come under the continued persecution of various Muslim governments, notably under the new Syrian regime that replaced that of Assad, whose regime provided a certain degree of protection to the Druze along with other minority groups in Syria, partly as a result of Bashar al-Assad's Alawite faith. As mentioned at the start of the video, the strike on Majd al-Shams in the Golan Heights killed 12 children and injured 42 others. All of the dead and injured were members of the Druze minority. In response to the attack, 3 days later on the 30th of July 2024, Israel conducted what it said was a targeted strike on an apartment building in southern Beirut against senior Hezbollah figure Fuad Shukr. While the killing was not carried out as part of a deliberate action to protect the Druze minority in what is internationally recognized Syrian territory, the IDF stated that the attack was a response to a Hezbollah strike on Israeli territory and was most likely carried out as a direct response to said attack on what Israel recognizes as its territory. It is interesting to observe the deliberate use of the word Druze in Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari's statement on the strike. The Druze are considered to be allies of Israel by the Israeli state, having been recognized as an official minority in 1959 at the request of Druze religious leaders, and as a result they enjoy preferential treatment as opposed to certain other minorities, notably the Palestinians. The Druze and the Circassians are the only two minority groups in Israel required by law to serve with the IDF. However, for these two groups, only men are required to serve, as opposed to the Jewish majority, where men and women are required to serve. Although this may be seen as a downside, serving in the military is highly beneficial for the social status of the Druze, and when conscripts complete their mandatory military service and become reservists, they are entitled to a number of benefits including subsidized housing. Notably, the Druze also served as volunteers prior to the introduction of mandatory conscription for them in the 1950s. They are also integrated into mainstream Israeli society at a higher degree than other minority groups, being notably overrepresented in Israeli politics. Their status in Israeli society society as a supposedly trusted minority group originates in the close bond that formed between the two groups as Jewish settlers began arriving in Mandatory Palestine in the 1940s and 50s, where Druze would frequently protect Zionist settlements and settlers. Said bond is maintained by their service in the IDF and Israeli police force, which provides them with a prominent voice in Israeli society and elevates them to a higher social status not attained by other minority groups, which also has the added consequence of their voice being one the Israeli state cannot necessarily ignore. While the Druze are certainly more integrated and have a more positive view of Israel than other minority groups within the state, not all Druze living within Israeli territory consider themselves to be Israeli. Notably, the roughly 20,000 Druze who live in the Golan Heights consider themselves Syrian. This links back to the attack on Majd al-Shams in July 2024. As the Golan Heights are under Israeli occupation, Israel thus recognizes the heights as Israeli territory, which it thus used for justification for the targeted strike that killed Fuad Shukr. You might ask what role the Druze actually played in this, other than being the victims of an airstrike. The short answer is, protection of the Druze is something that Israel sees as useful. Due to the prior mentioned connection that the Druze hold with the state of Israel and its Jewish majority, if Israel can be seen to be carrying out targeted strikes as a response to aggression against the Druze people, it is not only useful for them as it provides them with reasoning to carry out such attacks that subsequently further their own ambitions, in this case to take out a prominent Hezbollah figure, but it also helps to keep the Druze minority within the country on the side of the state. Druze in Israel maintain strong ties and relationships with other Druze communities in neighbouring countries, and the willingness of Israel to stand up for the group in this instance tells the Druze that they are with them, even if the said Druze who were victims of the July 2024 attack do not consider themselves to be Israeli. The special relationship between the Israeli state and the Druze reaps plenty of benefits for both sides. For the Druze themselves, it allows them to maintain their own unique culture and religious beliefs while subsequently being able to achieve a degree of power and integration not held by any other minority groups within Israel. Whilst for Israel, it means that they have the Druze on their side not only as a trusted minority within Israel, but outside of it too, one that can become potentially useful when it comes to justifying Israeli military goals. Israel views the Golan Heights as an integral part of its territory, but the fact that it is not internationally recognized has resulted in widespread condemnation from the international community. Israel has claimed that the occupation is a necessity, however, to protect itself from its hostile neighbor, Syria, and terrorist groups such as Hezbollah, which actively threaten Israeli sovereignty. Recent events, though, may have led to a divergence in this rhetoric. Israel's 2024 military action in Lebanon virtually wiped out Hezbollah, as did its war on Gaza with Hamas and decisive action against the Iranian regime with US backing. In addition to this, regime change in Syria has no longer meant that the substantiated threat the Assad regime supposedly posed to Israel is relevant. The relevance of these justifications is dated and unlikely to be accepted or taken seriously by the international community. This is where the Druze come in. Despite notable objections from the Druze in the Golan towards the use of themselves as a group for justifications of Israeli military actions, with many in the Druze community claiming that the strike was not targeted at the football pitch, as Israeli military installations do exist in the area, the justification that the incident gave Israel to take out a prominent Hezbollah leader could also be seen as Israel protecting its Druze minority. The ability that the excuse of protecting the Druze gives Israel to act in its interests in the region is one that can perfectly replace the existing excuse that the occupation of the Golan Heights and military action against neighbouring countries is necessary for counter-terrorist and security purposes. The special relationship between Israel and the Druze is well established and powerful, so from a neutral standpoint, it makes sense for Israel to protect the Druze as a national minority with strong connections to and prominent roles within the Israeli state, to maintain the special relationship between the two peoples. It also enables Israel to do what would be seen as the morally right thing in the given situation, due to the persecution faced by the Druze in Syria in particular, even if their intentions go far beyond merely protecting them, which leads into Israel's airstrikes on Damascus in 2025. The city of Suwaida in southern Syria is the capital of the governorate that bears the same name. Most of its residents are Druze, and the city acts almost as a de facto capital for the Druze within Syria. The city is no stranger to violence, having been subject of an initial failed Assad regime offensive to recapture part of the region from ISIS in June 2018, which failed and was followed by a suicide bombing the next month, carried out by ISIS and targeting the Druze community, which killed 258 people. In response to the bombing, the then Syrian government launched another offensive to recapture territory held by ISIS in August. This one was a success and resulted in the recapture of Suwaida in November 2018. In the aftermath of the fall of Assad's regime, violence had broken out in Suwaida governorate in early 2025, following the outbreak of a Druze insurgency in the region in response to territorial disputes with the new Syrian government and heightening tensions between Druze and Arab militias in the area. In July, following reports of the intimidation of a Druze vegetable seller by Bedouins, violent clashes between Druze and Bedouin militias broke out within the city. The government in Damascus sent in troops to quell the violence. However, these troops were accused of siding with the Bedouins over the Druze, intervening in clashes between the two sides sides and engaging in abuses against Druze civilians. After 2 days of fighting, on the 15th of July, a ceasefire agreement was reached between the government and the Druze militias. However, on the 19th, Syrian government forces re-entered the city in response to continuing violence between the two sides, whereas of the 7th of October 2025, they have remained. The day after the ceasefire was agreed upon, Israel launched airstrikes against the headquarters of the Syrian armed forces and within the vicinity of the presidential palace in Damascus. Israel stated that these strikes were carried out as a protective action on behalf of the Druze, with Netanyahu explicitly stating the IDF was working to save our Druze brothers and to eliminate the regime's gangs. For Israel, the ability to use the Druze as justification for the strikes in the wake of violence that heavily affected their communities demonstrates a shift in Israeli foreign policy towards Syria in particular. In the wake of the fall of the Assad regime, something which Israel had openly been calling for and celebrated when it happened, and of the waning influence of terrorist groups such as Hezbollah in the area as a result of Israeli military action against them, the ability to use the Druze due to their strong connections to Israel, where they are seen as a trusted minority, and their status as a minority group under threat in neighbouring countries, Syria in particular, allows Israel to, in inverted commas, come to the rescue of the Druze in areas where they are otherwise alone. Israel's role of acting as an ally of the Druze people allows them to justify military action against states hostile to both themselves and the Druze, in this instance the Syrian regime. The fall of the Assad regime has allowed Israel to heavily expand military operations within Syria, but the fact that the Assad regime was never particularly hostile towards the Druze, partly as a result of their neutrality during the Syrian civil war, allows Israel to, once again, use the Druze as justification for direct action against the new Syrian regime, especially given the fact that the new government in Damascus is not particularly hostile to Israel. Israel did carry out airstrikes and other military operations within Syria while Assad was in power, but in his departure he took with him virtually all hostility towards Israel and Damascus, resulting in Israel having to seek alternative reasoning for justifications of further military action against Syria, which, thankfully for Jerusalem, has manifested itself in the form of anti-Druze hostility carried out by the new regime. Israel's efforts to expand their influence over Syria have been deliberate since the fall of the Assad regime in December 2024. On the very same day that Assad fell, Israel invaded the buffer zone between Syria and the occupied Golan Heights, which it has continued to occupy since. This is something that could have never happened whilst Assad was in power, because in doing so it would have almost certainly triggered a response from Damascus with Russian and Iranian backing. The fall of Assad's regime has resulted in Israel having to change its tune on Syria, and in doing so it has taken advantage of sectarian fighting within the country, in this instance in the city of Suwaida, to justify its actions against the new Syrian government, which it has been attempting to force into normalizing relations. We will likely only see more of this in the future. Along with the rest of the Middle East, Israel has plans for Syria, which I could not do justice in this video and will be much better explained in a standalone video. All I am going to say for now is that, while these ideas may seem far-fetched and almost ludicrous for now, I doubt this will be the case in the future. To summarize, the strong connection held between the Israeli state and the Druze people has allowed Israel to use the Druze as a justification for its military actions against its neighbours, glimpses of which were seen in the Israeli response to the Majd al-Shams airstrike in 2024, and which has been on full display in Israel's strikes on Damascus in July 2025. As violence against the Druze continues in southern Syria, it will not be surprising to see further action being taken by Israel to further its own military aims. In the case of the 2025 airstrikes, likely trying to force Damascus to normalise relations in so-called defence of the Druze.